And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Sometimes when I have a few spare minutes, a lot of times at the end of the day, I like to go on YouTube and poke around and see what's there. Most of it, of course, is silly and frivolous. Much of it is vulgar and inappropriate. But I do, when I'm in a certain mood, like to go on YouTube and watch old sporting events, 30, 40, 50-year-old games. A habit I have which my wife to this day simply cannot understand. Why in the world would you want to watch that? She says. You already know who won. And as I think about it, it's not so much about the winning or losing. It really is just going back and remembering what it was like to be a kid again. I think that really is the attraction more than anything. Like I said, most of what you see on YouTube is pointless and silly and sometimes offensive. But every once in a while, you come across something that is really meaningful and can touch you in an emotional way. And that happened to me not too long ago when I stumbled across something on YouTube, a video that is now more than 100 years old. It was shot in 1912, and it's a video of a man named Franz Reichelt, who was a tailor and inventor in Paris. And he had experimented with a prototype of a parachute, which he thought would really work. There weren't any parachutes at the time. When you look at it, it looks more like a bulky kind of wingsuit, but he worked with this thing and he was sure, absolutely positive, that it would work. So he got permission, reluctantly, from French officials to test the thing by jumping off the Eiffel Tower. Now they begged him, don't jump yourself, use a dummy. But he would not listen, telling them the only way to show the world and to shut up the doubters is to do it myself. So in 1912, he climbs up nearly 200 feet up the Eiffel Tower. There's a camera up with him, and there's a camera on the ground. Remember, this is 1912. Movie cameras haven't been around that long. So it's black and white and grainy, and that just, to me, adds to the emotionalism of the moment. Because you see Franz Reichelt jump off the Eiffel Tower and drop horribly to his death. The parachute never opened, and he hits the ground with a sickening thud, creating a hole 6 inches deep. Reichelt, of course, was dead upon impact. He had put his faith and his trust in himself and in his invention, and he paid for it with his life. We're talking about trust this morning in our readings, both from the Old Testament in Jeremiah and from our gospel in Luke. From Jeremiah, we see quite plainly the difference, the contrast between putting our trust in God, which leads to life and health and peace, and putting our trust in ourselves, which invariably leads to sorrow and misery and disaster. Our reading from Luke is very similar to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, very similar to the Beatitudes. We're not sure if it's exactly the same speech or if it's a variation of it, but it says pretty much the same thing. Blessed are those who hunger. Blessed are those who are poor. Blessed are those who are reviled. And contrast that with, woe to the rich, woe to the well-fed, and woe to those who have good things said about you. Now, what Jesus is doing here is not giving a lesson about the circumstances of life. In other words, it's not a lesson that says the rich are always bad and the poor are always good. Rather, he's going deeper here and reminding us what our priority should be. Where is our priority? Where is our trust being placed above all else? Because usually the rich put their trust in themselves because that's their top priority, is making money. And they put that faith in themselves to do it. So again, Jesus is setting up that contrast between faith in God and faith in one's self, and reminding us that we should put our faith in God for direction in this life and salvation for the next. This issue of trust and what is our priority in life goes back to the very beginning. Go back all the way to Genesis and to how Satan tempted Eve. What did he say? Did God really say? In other words, Eve, put your trust in yourself. Don't trust what God said. Think on your own. You figure it out. Put your faith and trust in you. And of course, that had disastrous consequences. There's a wonderful book in the Old Testament, one of the greatest books in the Bible, that so clearly spells out this contrast, this dichotomy. And that is the book of Esther. Esther is a young Jewish girl living in captivity. It is during the time of the exile. And it is time for the king to pick a new queen. The old queen has fallen out of favor. So all these young girls vie for the attention of King Xerxes, and from all of them, the beautiful young Esther is chosen, a young Jewish girl. Her uncle is Mordecai, who has done various services and favors for the king, especially in revealing plots against him. The other principal player in this is Haman, an official in the king's court who hates Mordecai and hates the Jews because they will not bow to him when they see him. Haman wants people to bow to him, and Mordecai and the Jews won't do it. So Haman contrives to destroy Mordecai and the Jews and works his way in favor with the king. Mordecai discovers the plot and goes to Esther seeking help. Esther is reluctant at first, but Mordecai reminds her, do not think that you will be spared if the Jews are destroyed. And then this wonderful verse, Esther 4:14, and who knows, it may be that you have been brought to such a position as this just for this purpose. In other words, it may be that God has put you in this place at this time to do exactly this, to save your people. And Esther decides she will go to the king, even if it costs her her life. Esther does go to the king. Haman's plot is foiled. And the very gallows which he had built to hang Mordecai and the Jews he himself is now hanged upon. Haman had put his trust in himself, in his own evil and plotting and scheming. Mordecai and Esther put their faith and trust in God. And it was Esther who was willing to put her life on the line because she trusted in the Lord. What are you willing to put your life on the line for? What is it that you are putting your trust in above everything else in this life? Esther and Mordecai put their trust in God, and their physical lives were spared. Franz Reichelt put his trust in himself and his own intelligence and his own invention, and it cost him his life. God reminds us this morning to put our faith and trust and hope completely in Him, and especially in terms of our salvation. Do not trust in yourself for your own salvation. Do not trust in your own ability to get to heaven. Do not trust that you can be good enough or go to church enough or pray enough to get there. Put your faith and trust in God and in God alone and in His grace and mercy through His Son Jesus. You know, every time we get to the end of a sporting event nowadays, we always hear from the winners about, I knew we could do it, we believed in ourselves, we had confidence in ourselves, and that's what made the difference. And that always makes me think of the people on the other side, the losers, who had just as much faith, just as much confidence, and just as much belief in themselves, and it didn't turn out. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. This is not a lesson about not having confidence. I'm not saying don't believe in yourself. That stuff is great. Have confidence. That's important. That's wonderful. But you got to realize, you've got to know that when it comes to trust, when it comes to faith, when it's time to put your life and your soul and spirit on the line, who is it that you're going to trust? Who is it that you're going to put above everything else? Put your faith and trust and hope in the Lord, and lean not on your own understanding. Amen.